Hey, Jax. Hello, Jax. After visiting with my nutritionist, and you may have seen this in another video prior to this already, the nutritionist told me that I eat very healthy, and there were just a couple of tweaks I needed to do to see weight loss. And she said by doing these few little tweaks, I would see immediate results within days. Well, the opposite happened. Based on her tweaks, I gained weight. After getting fed up with the advice from my doctor and nutritionist, I consulted with a holistic healer. I don't even believe in a lot of approaches by holistic medicine. I have gone to a chiropractor in the past, and people say that's holistic. I know it helped me tremendously. There are things I do agree with, and there are things I don't. But I find myself agreeing with holistic approaches more than traditional medicine approaches. What I found out from the holistic healer, she believed I had an energy block. An energy block. What does that even mean? An energy block? She didn't elaborate on it. She just said, try to evaluate your life, see what's going on. Now, interestingly enough, I also saw a recent YouTuber who was talking about your weight loss is blocked by your mindset. So I thought, okay, well, taking those two together, an energy block and mindset, I dug deep. And I thought, what could be blocking my energy? What could be blocking my mindset? And I thought back to when I was working in corporate America. There was something in my past that could be contributing to my current health and weight issues. One day, my regular manager came in and said that there was a woman who was going to be coming in and working there with us. The company built a brand new branch, and she wanted that position. She came to our branch, and immediately she had this air about her. And my coworker and I picked up on it right away that she felt slighted and was bitter. And we were like, oh, this isn't a good start. She wasn't grateful of the opportunity to start fresh in the company. She was bitter. They didn't give her her old job back in the new branch. She wanted that position. She wanted the brand new branch. And you know what? Had she had that branch, she would have run it right into the ground. The company knew that. So why have this woman come back at all? That's what I never understood. I did her morning report. I did her agenda just like I did for my coworker. And we all three of us had a meeting. And I explained to her what I did there every day because she never had an assistant before, so she wasn't sure what my role was. And quite frankly, she didn't want me there. She thought it was redundant and she could do her own reports. And she didn't think that having me there was a benefit to her at all. I explained to her that I had helped my coworker grow his business to $2 million. That was double of what it was when I first started there. With my help, she can achieve growth in the company. And she started becoming aggressively silent about her day. I would send her her morning report. I would schedule client appointments with her and my coworker like I usually do. What I didn't know at the time was her phone was programmed to work just like mine. Therefore, she was getting all the phone calls. I was wondering why my phone was quiet. And she did that deliberately because she didn't want me giving any client appointments to my coworker. She just wanted all of them. I didn't realize this for maybe a week or two until one day I had to go to her desk for some reason and she wasn't there. She worked in our branch, but they didn't really have a place for her, so they created a nook for her. So she didn't sit directly next to me like my coworker did. She sat in a totally separate room. I went to her desk for whatever reason it was, maybe to leave her a message or something, and that's when I noticed the phone was ringing. And we had caller ID at this job, and I saw that the people calling were my coworkers' clients. So I answered the phone there. And when they heard my voice, they asked for her. And I said, why are you calling her? I don't understand. You've always worked with him. And they said, oh, well, the last time we called, she answered the phone and she set up an appointment with us. After I found this out, I went to the manager in the branch. And I explained to him that I was confused about this because my phone was the main phone line for the office. And that was my job. And he didn't even realize she had done that. So he called IT. They worked remotely. And he asked them, why did you do this? And they said she requested the change in her phone. He said, no, you don't do that. You turn it back to what it was. She was not to answer the phones. And they did. They turned it back so that just my phone would ring because I was the assistant. I was the one making the appointments for the two of them. And I wasn't biased. I was making the appointments for each of them. This person that I had worked with for several years already was established. He had a lot of clients. She had already run the other branch into the ground. She had no clients. She was to be taking the clients that never worked with my coworker. And there were plenty of them. It wasn't like I was cheating her out of clients. But she wanted to get his clients as well as having new clients that he wasn't already working with. One day, clients had called and they made an appointment with my coworker. Not her, but my coworker. They actually were referred there to see him specifically. I set up the appointment and they came in about 20 minutes early. When they walked in, she was coming out of the break room from getting a coffee and she had it in her hand and she happened to be walking by the door. And when she walked by that door, these clients came in and she greeted them immediately. She didn't wait for me to greet them, which she should have. The clients said they were there to see my coworker, that they had an appointment for 11 and it was only 10:40. They knew they were early, but they were willing to wait. And she said, oh no, you can come right over to my desk. I'll meet with you. Well, because these people had walked in early and because she nabbed them before I could even speak with them, I didn't realize they were my coworker's appointment. And he asked me if his appointment had arrived yet. And I said, I don't know. I haven't seen anybody for the 11 o'clock yet, but this couple came in and she took them right away to her desk. And they've been meeting with her ever since. And he said, okay, well, they're probably her appointment. I said, she didn't have any appointments. And he said, that's okay. After a while, she got up from her desk with this couple and they were absolutely mad as a hornet. They were talking very loudly at her, making exclamations that were not kind. And I could tell there was a problem. But I looked over at my coworker and I said, hey, there's a problem with these clients. They're like yelling at her and they're saying swears. And he said, I wonder what that's about. I said, I don't know. So as I was listening, she said, my coworker, who was sitting right there, wasn't there to meet with them, that he hadn't shown up. She lied right to the client's face and said this, as my coworker is sitting right there. And I went to the client and I said, I'm sorry, who is your appointment with? And she didn't like that. She got very mad at that. And I thought, that's just too darn bad. I'm the assistant and this is not, no, nobody's going to play like that with me. And I said, who are you here to see? And they said, my coworker. And I said, oh, well, he's right over here. Are you supposed to be here to see him at 11 o'clock? And it wasn't even 11 o'clock yet. And they said, yeah, but we're not going to see him now. And I said, well, what happened? I'm sorry. I sit right here. I didn't know that you came in to see him because you went off with her. And they said, No, she's extremely rude and will never do business with this company. And they left. It was so frustrating that this woman deliberately did that. I went to the manager in the branch and I explained what happened. And he said, "You're just jealous of her." I said, "Wow, I've never been a jealous person and I don't need to be jealous of that one. I'm not going to be jealous of somebody who is unethical and lies and manipulates. I'm sorry. There's no reason to be jealous here. I have nothing to be jealous about. Try again. Maybe ask her what happened." And he said, "Just go back to your desk. Just go back to your desk and forget about it." It wasn't surprising. This is how these people are in this particular company. My coworker went to lunch because he didn't have any other appointments until later that day. I was sitting at my desk typing up my paperwork. I had a lot of reports that I had to do every day. Another couple walked through the front door, and once again, it was almost like she was waiting in the shadows for these people, and she took them aside right to her desk. It didn't bother me one bit because my coworker wasn't there, so I knew they weren't there to see him, most likely. They didn't have an appointment that I knew of, and it could be possible that she made her own appointment, so I wasn't going to worry about it. I was just going to sit there, mind my business, do my job. I overheard her telling these people that our branch was horrible to clients and that they should seek advice from a different branch. When I heard her say this, I didn't say a thing right off the bat. I didn't confront her because at this point, I already knew what kind of character she was. I wasn't going to get into a confrontation with this woman. I waited for my coworker to return from lunch, and at that time, she went to lunch. So I outwardly expressed what I thought of her and her little shenanigans that she had going on and what she had just done. After struggling and succeeding to help my coworker double his business growth, there was no way I was letting this woman take me down. I went to my manager and I said, "Hey, look, I'm not trying to start anything here. I never complained. I wasn't that type of employee. So if I did have a complaint, it was valid." I said, "She just told these clients to go to another branch that were awful to clients." And they walked right out the door. Now, my immediate manager in the branch, he also had a report card where the company graded him and his raises and his pay were based on the business and growth of our branch. You would think he would have been like, "What is she doing? I'm going to have a talk with her." No, that's not what I learned. That they were accelerating her position in the company and they wanted her to do the same amount of business as my coworker, $2 million each. And she now was promoted to a corporate employee. She wasn't just a branch employee. That meant her pay was different. She got a mileage stipend. Pretty much everything you would get as a corporate employee except a company car. One day I went into work and she had been absent for a few days. I had some reports for her that were over the accumulation of the past few days. And when she came in, I greeted her politely like I greet everybody. And I explained to her that I have the reports. And she walked up around my desk. I had an L-shaped desk. And she walked up around the desk and she shoved her body against my chair and pushed me under the desk really tight. And I was up tight against the desk, like I was having trouble breathing. I said, "Let me go. What are you doing?" And she let out this massive amount of nasty breath over my shoulder and ear that I could smell. Like, I was like, "What are you doing?" Oh, God, it was horrible. And she said, "I've been sick for 3 days. I hope you don't catch it." And she turned around. She actually took supplies right off my desk that I bought. I had just bought them at the store. They were like paper clips, a fun colored stapler, some file folders. She just took them right off my desk and walked away with them. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind. I need some of these for my desk." And she just took off with them. I went to my coworker and I said, "You wouldn't believe what this woman just did to me. It's disgusting." And he was like, "I'm too busy to talk about it. Just try to get through your day." And then I felt like alone, like I had nobody to run this by. I went back to the store to get some more supplies that she took off my desk to replenish those, as well as getting some extra pens and stuff. I had this little organizer on my desk for clients. So when they came in and they signed paperwork or whatever, they could have a pen. She came in that morning and she was very late. She was about 2 hours late. And she walked up to my desk and she reached, it's hard to explain, but she took this hand and she reached behind her waist and she turned. And as she turned, she took a handful of the new pens I just bought and she walked away because she thought I wasn't going to see her do that. I guess she thought she was being sneaky. Like if she had grabbed him with her regular hand, I would have noticed. But by putting her hand behind her back and slinking around and trying to grab my pens, I wouldn't notice. I don't care at this point. That's the least of my worries with this woman. The company had an outing. They were playing sports. It was a company sports day. I'm really not a fan of the sport they were playing. I stayed back at my desk and did my work. And she too did not go to the company outing. Up until this point, she walked with a limp. I had asked her once about the limp, and she told me that it was a really old car accident she was in, and I never gave it another thought. But this day, when she came in, she put her stuff down on her desk. She started skipping through the office like a child, just skipping. And I looked up and I said, wow, you've made a miraculous recovery. That's pretty impressive. She says, what do you mean? I said, well, you come in limping every single day and today you're skipping. That's great. I'm glad you're feeling better. And she went right back to limping until a client walked in. When the client walked in, it happened to be somebody that she knew, and she set this appointment up for herself. They were a friend of hers or whatever. So she was meeting with them. She started jumping up and down, skipping, laughing, carrying on like there were no problems. This woman was moving stealthier than me. I'm like, what in the world is going on? The next day, everybody was back. The company outing had ended. Everybody came back, and she was back to not just limping, but now hunching over. Well, I thought for a moment, well, maybe she hurt herself when she was jumping around and carrying on like she was. But that wasn't it. This woman was actually faking the entire time. She never had a limp. She never had any type of problem. In fact, she was never even in a car accident. This woman could pass an agility test with no problem. My manager was the one that actually figured this out because our whole entire branch was recorded. And when he was looking back at the tape, because he was out at the company outing, he saw the difference. He saw her skipping around, jumping, and he came to me and said, I think you're onto something with her. I think that you're right about her. After this happened, the manager is now on my side. Other people in the branch, though, were torn. They thought, because I had been the only woman in the branch for several years, that I was just making waves because she was another woman. That is not the case at all. I've always worked with women. There's no problem there. Like, I just didn't talk to them anymore. And it really created a division in our branch. One day, she came in late again, and this was habitual for her. Nobody seemed to say anything to her about being late. She came in, and she said, I had a terrible morning. I said, are you okay? I always have empathy for people, even if they treat me wrong. And she said, I hit a school bus. I said, you hit a school bus? She said, yeah, I didn't even see it. It parked behind me. She drove a very small four-door sedan. There's no way in the world you wouldn't see a school bus behind you. And I said, why were you backing up to begin with? Like, why were you driving in reverse? And she said, oh, well, I was trying to back out of a space. The whole story didn't make any sense. I left for lunch that day, and as I passed by her car in the parking lot, I noticed that there was no yellow or black anywhere on her car. There was no transfer paint. If you hit something with a white vehicle, there's going to be transfer paint. I just shook my head in disbelief, like, that's weird. Plus, there was rust. There was a dent, but the dent was like this. It wasn't like this, like horizontal. If she backed into a school bus, they have those bars in front here that swing out when the bus comes to a stop. That bar would have been closed. There was no dent that was horizontal. It was a vertical dent. And I was, for the life of me, couldn't figure out how in the world. But then I noticed in that scratch was rust. That was an old scratch. That wasn't something that happened that day. A few days later, my coworker and I are busy at our desks doing reports and stuff. It was a slower day, so we didn't have many clients coming in. I noticed that there was a downturn in client appointments. She came in late again, and she approached my desk. She asked to borrow something from my desk. And I said to her, why don't you go to the store and buy your own office supplies? You've been doing this longer than I have. You would think you'd be prepared for this job. And she turned around and she said, you know, my mother had a cat once. And I looked at her and I said, well, that's nice. And she said, yeah, until I had it put down. And she said, well, you love cats, right? I said, yeah, I do. I love all animals. I love dogs, cat. And she said, yeah, I couldn't stand my mother, so I had her cat put down. I said, that's atrocious. That is like a really sick, evil thing to do. That she was no longer working just in our branch as a corporate employee. She could work anywhere. She was telling clients to go to this other branch, and then she would go work there and meet with them, because that's how she was sneaking around. My manager said, you know, it's terrible and it affects the whole branch here, but I don't think corporate is going to care, because in all, the business goes to the corporation. They're not going to care where it comes from. They're not going to care where she's conducting business. They don't care if she's conducting business over there or here. It still goes to the corporation. I said, yeah, but you should care. This is your branch. You're the manager of this branch. And as such, you should put your foot down and you should say something about it. He knew the managers of other branches very well, and he had an activity going on that weekend with these other people. It was a corporate event. He went to that event and he spoke to these other managers. They told him that woman was not of good character. This woman was evil. One day I had a half a day. As I was leaving the building, she came up to me in a panic. And she said, where are you going? And I said, oh, I have a half a day today. She said, no, you don't. You have a half a day tomorrow. No, I don't. I have a half a day today. She got it confused and thought my coworker was taking a half a day that day. She said, oh, I wanted to stay late with you today. I was hoping you could walk me to my car. I said, why would I walk you to your car? And she said, oh, I wanted to show you something. As I was walking to my car, it was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe a little later. I had just gotten off for my half a day. And I walked by her car and her tire was flat. It was totally out of air. I said, oh no. I went back into the branch and I went directly up to her and I said, your tire is flat. And she says, yeah, I know. I said, you know, I hope you didn't drive on it like that. And she said, no, I knew it would be flattened by about now. I left. When I came in the next day, they had started a rumor that I popped her tire, which is ludicrous. I've never popped anybody's tire. So they were all kind of bullying me about it. They were determined to let me know how they felt about it. I was like, what are you all talking about? And they were like, you know how you popped her tire. I said, don't ever say that again. I didn't pop her tire. Then I got to thinking about it, and I was like, no, you know what? A better explanation is, she told me to my face that she thought I was staying late. She wanted me to walk her out to her car. I said, for what? I'm not going to change her tire. I have AAA if I need a tire change. Or there's a garage literally 2 streets down. Why would I stay late to change her tire? And I thought about it hard, and I said, you know what? I bet this woman was going to try to hurt me. She lures me out into the parking lot after everybody leaves. She has a flat tire. I don't know. It just made no sense what this woman was thinking or doing. But at that point, I realized this woman was dangerous. I went to my manager and I demanded a meeting. They made the decision that day to move this woman out of the branch. My manager knew there was something wrong with that woman. Afterward, he came to me and he says, I know you're right. I'm sorry that you went through this, but she's going to be moved out of our branch, so we don't have to worry about her anymore. But the damage was already done. It took about 2 more years for the branch to regain the business that she sent off to other branches. Before I left the company, I talked with somebody who knew both of them. Knew both of them from a different job. And he looked me straight in the eye. And he said, these 2 people are the most evil people I've ever met. They should not be working in this company. They should both probably be in jail. In his opinion. That's what he said to me. He said they are the most evil, corrupt lunatics. He told me a story of a similar matter that they did to him as well. And let me just say this. This man is a highly influential person. He's a millionaire. He has a business portfolio of over $1 billion. This man is legit. He's the real deal. He wouldn't just be nonchalantly telling me, a nobody, he just wouldn't talk to anybody like that. But because of what I told him about them, he was moved to tell me his experience with them, and that it's not me, it was them, and that this is what they do. These are the types of people they are. And he didn't understand why my company would even entertain these 2 fools. She started working in 2 other branches, and both branches had her physically removed from the buildings. She was really rude to clients. They also noticed a downturn in business for no reason. And eventually, she did go on to retire. There was also something else about this woman, and I don't know what this practice is. I don't know if it was voodoo. I don't know what it was. But this woman was literally taking dirt from plants and spreading it around. I found her fingerprints in my potted plant at work. She took her 2 fingers and she went like this and scraped the dirt out, and she sprinkled it everywhere. My manager said, well, you didn't see her do that. And he refused to look at the tapes. But coincidentally, I had gone to another branch, and I talked to the girl in that branch. And that girl confirmed it was her. She saw her do it, and the woman said she did it because she's into this type of, I don't know what you call it, manifestation. She manifests her own success. And part of that was using dirt from a potted plant. I don't really understand it. So back to my holistic healer. When my holistic healer mentioned that there was something wrong with my energy flow, I thought back to this woman. And I thought, wow, I've been holding all that in. So I'm making this video to get it out of my system. So thank you for watching, because even though it sounds totally crazy, this really truly happened. Nobody should have to go to work every day and deal with somebody like this. But maybe now, since I talked about it and I got it out of my system, I can move past it. I didn't even realize it might be the dark cloud over my day, if you know what I'm saying. So if you like this kind of content, please subscribe to my channel, because I'm going to be posting my health adventure, what I'm doing to lose weight. I'm going to be posting different food ideas and things like that. So if this is your cup of tea, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Take care.